Tonight, pro-Palestinian encampments spread to more than half a dozen Canadian campuses. Digging in at the University of Toronto as counter-protesters turn up at McGill.
Free, free, justice,
New arrests and violent clashes in the U.S. And the new police body cam footage from the raid at Columbia University. The nightmare after a tanker crash on a major U.S. highway.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked surreal.
Plus, taking stock of the rising costs of airfare as the summer travel season prepares for takeoff.
There is a carbon tax for intra-provincial travel.
Things like competition, things like food, things like fuel.
It helps us with feeling fuller longer.
Also, the risks and rewards of a new weight loss drug coming to Canada. And finding a new way to cope with an insidious disease.
Different movements too, right? It is really a help.
Why a growing number of Parkinson's patients are turning to Pilates.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. Campus protests sweeping across North America have now spread to the grounds of Canada's largest university. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators breaching a fence early this morning to set up an encampment at the University of Toronto, one of 7 nationwide, 3 in British Columbia, 3 in Ontario, and 1 in Quebec at Montreal's McGill, where today pro-Israeli protesters also turned up, a heavy police presence as both sides came face to face. CTV's Adrian Gabriel on the new tensions.
Long live the Intifada!
Tensions on the front lines as a growing number of standoffs take hold of Canadian university campuses.
Palestine will never die!
Israeli counter-protesters are kept at arm's reach by special constables from hundreds of pro-Palestinian supporters who stormed the University of Toronto in the early morning hours, setting up this encampment in the center of campus, as well as a strict screening process for anyone trying to enter.
We want to make sure that the people who come in are people who are allied with us.
Colonization!
In Montreal, an even larger police presence descended on the University of McGill, where pro-Israel protesters set up opposite an encampment, one day after a Quebec court refused to order its removal. In both cities, demands from those on the ground for each educational institution to divest any investments from companies protesters claim are supporting Israeli war crimes.
The University of Toronto has active investments in weapons manufacturing and companies that enable Israeli apartheid, and so it's actively funding, this ongoing genocide.
Though Jewish student support organizations believe these protests on Canadian soil have gone too far.
When it's done in a way that kind of arrogates a particular area of campus to a particular group and allows certain people to decide who comes into that area, that public area, and who cannot, that's a problem, and that crosses the line.
While protesters say there's no room for Islamophobia or anti-Semitism at the encampments, members of the Jewish community point to these messages, claiming they tell a different story.
Oh, is that written over there?
With some organizers appearing surprised to learn of the words being written and shared by some.
Do you believe all Zionists are terrorists?
No, of course, absolutely not. There's a very distinct difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism.
While university campuses across Canada have played host to demonstrations for decades, U of T have given protesters here until tonight to vacate this encampment. Those we've spoken with, Omar, say they're not leaving.
Adrian Gabriel at the U of T, which said late tonight it will not remove protesters this evening if they remain peaceful. A different story in the U.S. More than 2,100 arrests nationwide since the campus demonstrations began. New York police today releasing portions of this body cam video from Tuesday night's raid at Columbia University. And also today, for the first time, the U.S. president broke his silence on the campus unrest. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin on what he had to say.
From peaceful protest to this.
Get back! Get back!
Overnight at UCLA in California, police in riot gear moved in, dismantling a pro-Palestinian encampment protesting the war in Gaza. Authorities called it an unlawful gathering. After a long night of clashes, confrontations, and flashbangs. Police tore down the barricades, arresting more than 200 people.
I'm a student here. I'm an English major.
Shame on you!
Ugly scenes of violence as authorities crack down on student revolts rocking American campuses. After days of silence, U.S. President Joe Biden weighed in.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law.
Under political pressure to say more, Biden condemned hate speech against Jewish students on campus.
It's all wrong. It's un-American.
But being an election year, his likely Republican rival pounced.
This is a movement from the left. These are radical left lunatics. And they got to be stopped now.
New York police released new images and say that half of the nearly 300 arrested at Columbia University and City College were outside agitators. In Washington, this peaceful protest has only grown larger. Georgetown student Selena Al-Shahabi voted for Biden and is willing to be arrested for the cause.
The fact that he claims to be all for human rights and is sending billions of dollars that are actively funding a genocide that he himself has condemned is pathetic.
These are the voters Biden needs. The president today rejected calls to change U.S. policy towards Israel and said the National Guard will not intervene on campuses. Omar?
All right, Joy, thanks. Israel's president today offered his support to Jewish students on campuses and condemned the protests.
We see prominent academic institutions, halls of history, culture, and education contaminated by hatred and anti-Semitism. We watch in horror as the atrocities of October 7th against Israel are celebrated and justified.
Thank you very much indeed for all.
At the same time, Palestinians in Gaza are thanking American students.
Since I am an academic here in Gaza Strip, I know the voice of academic people. Thank you very much indeed for contributing in making our voice audible. Thank you very much indeed for sharing our voice around the world.
The criminal trial of Donald Trump was back on in a Manhattan court today.
Who starts a case right smack in the middle of somebody's elections? It should be illegal because it's election interference.
The former U.S. president is accused of falsifying financial records to hide hush money payments to a porn star to cover up an affair. Today, a key witness, the porn star's lawyer who negotiated the payoffs, took the stand. Keith Davidson grew hostile as Trump's attorneys accused him of extorting celebrities. The jury also heard a secret recording of Trump discussing a payment to a former model with then-lawyer Michael Cohen. A fiery crash on a highway in Connecticut created a traffic nightmare.
I can feel the heat from here.
The crash involved a passenger car, tractor-trailer, and fuel truck, igniting this massive fire on I-95. The tanker was carrying more than 32,000 liters of gas. Remarkably, no one was injured. And there are new tragic details about Monday night's deadly wrong-way collision near Toronto. Grandparents and their 3-month-old grandson were killed after the police pursuit. Today, Ontario's Special Investigations Unit said the couple was visiting from India and that the baby's parents were in the same car, injured and taken to hospital. A suspect was also killed in the crash. Advocates are concerned this week's heated rhetoric over drug decriminalization in Parliament will result in knee-jerk measures instead of long-term solutions to fix the growing opioid epidemic, which has hit record levels. CTV's Judy Trin reports.
More drug use is occurring in public spaces across Canada. The problem is most acute in Vancouver. British Columbia received an exemption last year from the federal government to decriminalize and stop charging people for possessing small amounts of drugs. The province wants to reverse that policy. So do police.
Like at a beach or in a park or at a bus shelter, for example, when people were using drugs in those places that were not exceptions to the exemption, there was honestly nothing that police could do.
BC's request fueled political rhetoric.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
The most recent data from last year shows that more than 4,600 people were hospitalized. Nearly 6,000 died from overdoses, an average of 22 deaths a day. Harm reduction experts say a lack of affordable housing have forced more users to live on the streets.
What you're seeing in BC isn't an impact of decriminalization, it's an impact of these other social factors of poverty, oppression, and lack of spaces for people to go to consume their drugs.
Research shows as much as 80% of street drugs are laced with fentanyl. Half of all overdose deaths come from smoking opioids, not injecting them. Smoking bylaws across the country prevent people from inhaling drugs inside supervised consumption sites, so more deaths are taking place out in the open. Advocates also want users to get access to prescribed opioids to wean them off their addiction.
We need to provide regulated alternatives to the toxic, unregulated supply that we have at the moment to truly see life-saving measures taking place.
These solutions are expensive and take much longer than charging and arresting users. Omar.
All right, Judy, thank you. Some mixed economic news from the Bank of Canada governor today, who appeared before a Commons committee.
We have come a long way in our fight against inflation, and recent progress is encouraging,
boosting the likelihood of a rate cut. But he said rates are unlikely to go back to pre-COVID levels, and when they do begin to fall, it will be gradual. Despite that positive news on the path of inflation, some shoppers aren't yet feeling it and have started a boycott of Canada's biggest grocery chain. Today, Loblaw chairman Galen Weston called it misguided criticism, saying his company alone can't be blamed for rising costs because inflation is a global issue. The grassroots boycott started in response to soaring prices and profits. And Canada's financial crimes watchdog has imposed its biggest fine ever. TD Bank has been ordered to pay more than $9 million for failing to report suspicious transactions, such as those potentially having to do with money laundering or terrorist financing. The bank also faces compliance investigations in the U.S. Airline executives are in the hot seat in Ottawa as MPs examine the state of the industry. So far, the spotlight has been on rising costs of travel for companies and consumers. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth on the reasons why.
A Commons committee is examining the state of the airline industry after Lynx Air filed for protection from its creditors. Air Canada is also reporting a loss of $81 million in its first quarter. WestJet executive Andrew Gibbons says the carbon tax is causing a barrier to cheaper flights.
There is not a carbon tax for inter-provincial travel. There is a carbon tax for intra-provincial travel. So from Toronto to Ottawa, I believe it exists.
According to CAA, there are many reasons why air travel is more expensive these days.
Things like competition, things like food, things like fuel.
There are other frustrations like lost time stranded in airports.
To me, an hour isn't a delay. It's 2 to 3 hours is a delay. And once you get that sort of a delay, it's crushing.
This couple usually can't afford to fly. A rare last-minute bargain has them on the move.
We looked online and we found a smoking good deal.
Julia Kent says the hearings in Ottawa provide an opportunity to hold airlines accountable.
That's really what the Air Passenger Bill of Rights is all about and what we want to see executed if any changes come to it this year.
As we move away from pandemic travel restrictions, there is evidence that the industry has grown, especially over the past 24 months, both in the larger airports and in the smaller regional centers.
2023 was great. We got back to about 85% of pre-pandemic activity,
with even more growth expected in the coming months.
We have a number of returning airlines and flights that are coming back to our airport this summer.
Some airlines will be new to Canadian airports, others returning for the first time since the pandemic. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
Canadians struggling with obesity will have a new treatment option next week. The makers of Ozempic say their weight loss drug Wegovy will be available in Canada starting Monday. CTV's Alison Bamford has more on the risks and the rewards.
A different name with different packaging, but experts say Wegovy is essentially a drug Canadians already had access to.
Wegovy is Ozempic, and Ozempic is Wegovy.
Wegovy is classified as an anti-obesity medication. Ozempic is a type 2 diabetes drug. Both contain the molecule semaglutide.
It helps us with feeling fuller longer. It helps our brain understand that we're good.
Health Canada approved Wegovy for weight loss back in 2021, but ongoing supply shortages made it unavailable to Canadians, which is why doctors commonly prescribed Ozempic as an off-label drug for obesity management.
It has nothing to do with weight loss for me.
Ian Patton has used Ozempic for the last 2 years.
It was all about my health. I was dying. I was very, very sick, and I needed something.
Now, with a drug labeled for obesity, many hope it improves access for patients who really need it.
Hopefully, the bias around prescribing a medication for weight management changes.
Doctors warn against using these types of drugs for cosmetic purposes, but experts say the class of medication has been around for 20 years and shown to be safe for those taking it as a long-term obesity medication.
If there was something that would be a risk, a long-term risk of these medications, we really would start to see this.
Novo Nordisk, the maker of the drugs, plans to ramp up production as Wegovy makes its way to Canada Monday. While there are other anti-obesity drugs out there, some doctors say this one opens the door for cheaper, more effective treatments down the line. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
Coming up, the night out that has Britney Spears back in the spotlight, plus the Quebec man who allegedly fathered hundreds of children. Reports tonight that Britney Spears is safe at home after paramedics responded to an incident at an LA hotel. Sources tell American media that the pop star got into a fight with her boyfriend at the Chateau Marmont and went home with her security team. Spears took to Instagram today to say she twisted her ankle and that paramedics showed up at her door illegally. It comes on the same day that Spears and her ex-husband Sam Asghari officially settled the terms of their divorce. Still no word tonight when London Drugs, a popular Western Canadian pharmacy chain, will reopen its stores in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Andrew Johnston on what security teams are examining and why the closure won't just impact the company's bottom line.
On Vancouver's Robson Street, one by one, London Drugs customers are turned away.
I just came to go in there and, closed, it's been hacked.
She's going to fill her prescription somewhere else.
The hackers, well, they're so smart these days, right? They can hack that. The next thing it'll be our banks, and the money will be gone out of our bank account.
The department stores across 4 provinces are closed for a 5th day.
This is the longest retail closure due to a cyber attack, certainly in Canada.
London Drugs hasn't revealed what exactly it's dealing with, saying in a statement today, there are billions of lines of code to review. Our teams have been working around the clock, and we are seeing progress in our restoration. The company admitted Tuesday personal information may have been compromised, but today says there's no evidence of that yet.
The folks who probably work in the IT department at London Drugs are likely on hour 96. They're exhausted. They haven't slept. They're stressed out. Executives are having their worst week of their lives.
Business watchers predict the Canadian-owned chain's reputation will take a hit as it also takes on heavy losses.
I wouldn't be surprised in the end that it's in the hundreds of millions.
Security experts are seeing attacks targeting healthcare happening more often and say Canada's safeguards are falling behind the U.S.
This country is not paying attention to this at the most senior political levels.
Pharmacists are still working inside the closed stores, providing emergency prescriptions and urgent care. London Drugs says it's hoping to reopen even partially as soon as possible. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
Still ahead, a World Wildlife First. The primate that turned to the healing power of nature. A wildlife and medical first in Indonesia to tell you about tonight. Scientists say this orangutan has become the first creature to treat an injury with a medicinal plant. Researchers saw the primate chewing the stem and leaves of a plant with anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties and then applying it to a wound on his cheek. They say the behavior could come from a common ancestor shared by humans and great apes. Three men from the same Quebec family have apparently fathered hundreds of children.
There are more than 600 children from these three men. It's really a never-ending story.
According to a new docuseries, the trio served as sperm donors for women across the province who turned to online ads to get pregnant. Many of the mothers were horrified to learn that their children had dozens of half-brothers and sisters. Two of the donors also had a rare genetic disorder affecting the liver. After the break, the power of Pilates, the workout giving strength to those with Parkinson's. More than 100,000 Canadians live with Parkinson's disease, and 30 more are diagnosed every day. There's no cure, but there are therapies that can help manage symptoms. A growing number of patients are turning to Pilates. CTV's Garrett Barry checked in on an exercise class in St. John's, now in its 10th year, where demand is growing.
Twice a week in this Pilates gym, this group gets together for training. Today, an advanced class, pushing muscles and bodies as far as they can go.
So they feel stronger, they literally can notice more strength, they feel a bit more potentially flexible, better agility, better balance, etc. That brings the confidence up.
It's those good results that this class has been seeing for a decade now. Totally free for users, this project is funded by the Parkinson's Society in this province, part of their effort to keep members moving.
Exercise is so important for people who are living with Parkinson's. We wanted to ensure that we wanted to have as easy an opportunity for people to access these programs as possible.
It's a model that he believes could work well across the country. There's also boxing classes and Tai Chi.
I like to think that we probably have the best suite of programs anywhere in the country, but I would really like to be proven wrong by that.
It's become a ritual, even a social gathering, for those living with the disease and their caregivers. Some regulars have been coming here for years, and today, newcomers blended right in.
It's good, the more movement, the different movements too, right? It is really a help.
She instructs us as a group class, but as you saw, she picks on us individually. I should say picks on us, but pays attention to us. So that's how it works.
I think I did fine, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and will you come back?
Definitely, yeah.
It's been an emotional journey for the instructor, working closely with clients for a decade and seeing their perseverance.
Some days when they leave, I have a little tear, and I could do it right now, because it's very moving.
Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
And that's a snapshot of this Thursday. Heather's here tomorrow. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching, and good night.